Welcome back, everybody.
How were your conversations? Some must have been really good, I hope. We have time for one or two if anybody wants to turn their microphone on and let us know what your conversation was about.
I found a star at my meeting. Dr. Zora Smith Denson is a superstar, and she shared something with the group at the end that I think should be shared collectively. So, Dr. Zora, I know I'm pointing you out again, but let's go, okay? Let's go.
And that was not my intent, but I will certainly rise to the occasion. Our group, and thanks to Mr. Boyd, he led us into our why. We centered on that, and were we having any specifics going on in our coalition that we need to tackle. And my address or my answer to that was, I, like a good Girl Scout, I want to always be prepared. I cannot single out anything specifically, but should things arise, we want to make certain that we're able to address it. In the South, we find sometimes that there are people who are polite and to a fault. We do not open up and say what we feel. And so hopefully this working today together will help us to acknowledge and not be afraid to go across the room and tackle those concerns that we do have. That's what I'm looking to take away, is to be open, honest, and be able to have some ammunition should I get an opportunity to be able to utilize it. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you. That is wonderful. You just really underscored why we're here. This is a safe, free zone conversation. And so, you know, in order to address things, you got to talk about things. And so hopefully we'll get to a chance to do that today. Thank you, Dr. Zora. Anybody else? We're always saying that, you know, we can tell when you guys are having great conversations because you don't come back immediately. Zoom has to kick you out and bring you back. So anybody else shared their why? Some interesting whys.
Letitia, this is Pam. I'll go. I had a great group in group number 3. Yay. We appreciated hearing from, I think we had like 5 or 6 people in there about their why. Interestingly, many of it was similar, right? So the idea of really wanting to give back, really wanting to help others and to see communities and families that are healthy and thriving. Some people got to that place by going through some issues or, you know, even different kinds of levels of trauma before they came to that. But it was that experience that really helped them craft their why. And everybody was happy and smiling, knowing that they're doing exactly what they want to be doing.
Oh, thank you, Pam. That's
remarkable.
Did anybody else find any similarities with your why and others' whys? Oh, we've got a shy
So
group.
nobody was talking. Okay, just silence all around.
Well, you know what, Bingo, I do have, go ahead, Deborah.
Deborah, go ahead.
I found that the coalitions that we're with, they all somehow are based, centered around equity. So that is the reason it seems like we all are part of this, the coalition we're with, and we just want to continue the conversation of equity. That's what I found.
Love it.
This is Khalid. Also, I would like to add, I think that collectively, I think that we all would like to invoke change in our respective communities. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Khalid. It sounds like, you know, we're all here for similar reasons. We want to help the community. I just have to give a little PSA here. I want to thank everybody for completing the pre-surveys that were sent out. And from the response, it sounds like we've got a lot of people that know quite a bit about diversity and equity and inclusion. And so with that, that made us excited because then we know we're going to have some pretty rich conversations today. So please get comfortable, and every opportunity you get to share out, please do, because that means that someone's going to learn something. Okay.
And if you don't get a chance to share out loud, put it in the chat.
We got time for one more, I think.
I'll say something. I was practicing the step back method, but I definitely I'm excited about the training on today, and it was very great to be in the small groups. We had a lot to talk about, but one thing I have noticed is a common ground that we're all here for growth. Personal growth, because when we have personal growth and we better ourselves and our leadership abilities to be able to exercise equity and great leadership skills, then we can evoke more change and more growth in our communities.
Yeah, definitely.
Love it. All right, so we're going to transition into our next little section where I'm going to share my screen. Where I'm having to go. So I am in Mississippi with my laptop, which is not completely set up for everything. I had to come home on Sunday. My mom got rushed to the hospital. So please forgive me that it's going to take me just a second to get my PowerPoint shared. So give me just a second and talk amongst yourselves.
So I'll say something really quickly. I said it in the chat, but I just wanted to say thank you. We had 33 people respond to the pre-assessment, and that really allowed us to figure out what we wanted to talk about today and for us to develop the agenda that's coming up on the 25th. So I'll go ahead and plug in case we don't have time at the end. We have the second session. Go ahead and put it on your calendars. You will receive a calendar invitation for that as well. But it's May 26th, that's a Thursday, from 9:30 to 12:30, same amount of time. And we have the incredible Dr., excuse me, she's not a doctor, but she's awesome, Marilyn Hemingway from the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. She's the founder and president of that organization. And she's gonna talk to us about the historical foodways in that area and give some great information that I have on food justice and foodways that I'm really interested in learning about. So we're excited about the content for the second session. Make sure you have that on your calendar as well. Thanks.
Okay. And Katie, I was just looking through and again, you guys, I know we've got some shy introverts out here, so please feel free to utilize the chat field. We're going to be checking that and making comments on some of your notes that you put in there. So.
All right, so it's not working. My apologies. I'm going to get Tisha to open up on her side.
Yeah. Let me share my screen.
I also want to say that this is a great group because most people we have to convince that equity is an important idea, and the fact that we have everybody talking about already how important the work is and that the work is about equity in your coalitions just makes me more excited. So y'all might know a lot of the information that Tisha and Bingo are going to present. However, it's still really important for us to continue learning and growing with that growth mindset. So thanks for all that.
All right.
Yeah. So, Tisha, do you want to start us off with some breathing exercises?
Yeah, definitely. We actually like to start all of our sessions off with breathing exercise, just because we've got busy, crazy lives. People have got emails to respond to, phone calls to return. We've got the grocery list, meetings to go to. We've got a lot of chaotic stuff going on. And so when we have these conversations, we want you to be fully present. And so if We're going to ask you to just park all of that other stuff on the shelf somewhere. You can get it on your way out at the end of this session. But let's go ahead and close your eyes. I want you to just focus on my voice. We're going to tap into that 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. And what that nerve does is it controls our heart rate. It controls your breathing, your digestive system. And so it helps you kind of relax. And so if you're listening to my voice and you hear, if your shoulders are close to your ears, allow your shoulders to fall towards the floor. Just allow gravity to just pull those shoulders down. Allow your arms to fall to your side. And we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose, and I want you to hold it for 2, 3, 4, and then let it all out through your mouth, release. I'm going to take another deep breath in through the nose, hold 2, 3, 4, and blow it all out through the mouth. And again, through the nose, take a deep breath in, hold 2, 3, 4, release it all through your mouth. One last deep inhale in, 2, 3, 4, and blow all of the air through your mouth out of your body. And open up those eyes. Ooh.
Thank you.
Really
Give us a little wave that you're back with us.
Nobody fell asleep. Okay, that's good.
So I want to ask you, has anybody ever heard somebody say, I'm colorblind? I don't see color. I see some nods.
Yes.
So, yes, Nicoya.
Ah, hi, Nicoya. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
It wasn't a question. I was raising my hand.
Oh.
I can't lower it.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've all heard this, and from the research that I've done, it's typically not meant in any sort of negative way. It's meant because people really want it to be true. But the issue is that we are not colorblind. We see it. It exists, and when you say that you're colorblind or that you don't see it, you're negating somebody else's lived experience, right? So it can be harmful and hurtful. And so let's talk about a few things. Tisha, will you click through? Okay, so these are some of the things that colorblind ideology says. Only the absence of accounting for race will bring racial equality. So if we just stop talking about it, it's just gonna go away by itself. It assumes that racial hierarchies are not at play, which is harmful. So, and then, you know, it says things like, well, since most people believe in racial equality, which is absolutely true, and since the laws have changed to outlaw discrimination, which is also true, but I don't see color, so I can't be racist. And there's nothing in place that's making any of these things happen, right? There's no systems, there's no structures, but there's laws that outlaw discrimination, and racism is not causing this. So, but then what remains? What remains then is behavior or personal decisions. So the way that this idea came about was actually following Brown v. Board Supreme Court justice finding when Southern legislators decided to go into the laws and remove everything that mentioned race, but somehow continue to keep the structure in place. And a lot of it goes to this research done by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, working with the LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson administration, which blamed the hardships that Black American families were having on the mothers of those families, and that it is culture and not politics that it determines the success of a society. So that's 1965. We fast forward 50 years, and Paul Ryan is still spouting the same ideology, still spouting the same information, right? That there's a tailspin of culture in inner cities where people just don't want to work, right? The culture is that they don't want to work, so it's a culture problem that has to be dealt with. And so that puts the onus on the individual, right? And then, so we'll go to the next slide. So people say, well, let's think about it this way, right? So we'll think about markers of success. These are just some, there are several others that we could talk about, but these are the ones we're going to talk about today. Healthy families, longevity, food access, and access to care, right? So those are the markers of success for a healthy family, all right? But what if those are also barriers to success? Okay, so let's talk first healthy families. So, and these are some pretty damning statistics, and pretty hard to see and think about. African-American women are 243% more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And this goes across all socioeconomic boundaries. Anybody hear of somebody named Serena Williams? Anybody? Mm-hmm. Serena almost died in childbirth. She's one of the most well-known athletes in the universe. All the money, right? But what happened is her doctors did not listen to her. She said, I have a history of blood clotting. I need you to check that out. And they didn't listen. Next slide. And then, so we see the trend in infant mortality here, 2016 to 2020. So the green color at the top is non-Hispanic white. The darker green is non-Hispanic black. And then you see the others, orange is Hispanic. And if you see the, it's a downward trend for all, but those, the African-American women or African-American children are having much worse outcomes than others. Next slide. And then of course, COVID, the past few years have really pulled the veil back on these underlying disparities. And it's pretty unavoidable when you look at all of these together. However, in June of 2020, a medical doctor and senator said, could it just be that African Americans do not wash their hands as well as other groups? So again, the onus is on the individual. There's no structures in place. People just don't know how to wash their hands or distance themselves, right? Next, please. So what about food access? You need access to healthy foods, and just go over a couple of terms. I'm sure most of you have heard, get a poll, food desert. You might have heard food desert, food swamp, right? Food apartheid is really where the discussion is going now, because it is structural, right? It is a structural way to keep healthy foods away from certain populations. On my drive the other day, I was listening to NPR because nerd alert. But there was a man on there who, after Katrina in New Orleans, he built what is still today the only grocery store in the 9th Ward. The only grocery store. I know in Columbia, they've opened up, is that Uncle Willie's on North Main, the new grocery store up there?
Yes,
After one day, it's almost complete, like people were literally starving for this. So, and food sovereignty. So there's a big movement across the country. Food sovereignty means having control over the food, right? So how can we plant gardens? How can we get more access? And next slide, please. So in 2014, and then I had to buy this book because I was just blown away by this. Predominantly Black neighborhoods have higher access to fast food restaurants, while poverty itself is not an independent predictor of fast food access. What is that telling you? It's hard not to think that it's somehow intentional, right? So if you have $5 and 2 kids to feed, what are you going to do? You're going to drive through somewhere because they're hungry, right? You're going to buy a huge pack of ramen because your kids are hungry. Next, please. How about longevity, lifespan? Is that one not coming up?
Hmm.
Oh, okay, there we go. Somebody come off mute and tell me what they're reading here, what they see.
I'll go.
Okay.
Just based on, as I'm seeing on my screen, the average life expectancy at birth, it looks like Hispanics have their line just kind of pops up in 2000. So part of it, I think, is that there might not have been enough research on Hispanic lives or the lived experience. And then for Blacks, the research has been done, but they've always had the lowest numbers.
Yeah. And so, for example, in the Columbia area, there's a historic African-American neighborhood called Waverly, which is about 1.5 miles from Forest Acres, right? What do you think the difference is in life expectancy? Equal access. I mean, there are hospitals, there are grocery stores, there are 10 years. There's a 10-year gap. The only difference that I can see is race. And some of this has to do with what's being more and more researched now, a phenomenon known as weathering. So when you think about, this is how it was explained, you think about the edge of your roof, right, over a concrete patio, and you got one drip, right? You got a drip. So one drip, what's that going to do? Not much. 30 years of drip. What's that going to do? It's this constant stress, this constant microaggressions, demoralization, not believing. It's just this constant, and it physically affects bodies. Okay, next. What about access? So the darkest color is white, the orangey color is Black, blue is Hispanic. So overall, whites have more access, right, to, or has a regular doctor. And this is absolutely affected by socioeconomics, right? But it's also impacted by race. And some of that is just a general lack of trust, which is historic, and based in reality. Next, please. So we'd like to put you back into your groups for a while. But first, I'd like to, if we can come out of share screen and just kind of get gallery view. Okay. I'd like to get a couple of general responses from y'all before we put you into breakout groups. And I see there's a lot of information going on in the chat here.
We were mostly talking about Serena Williams and how she's the GOAT in the chat.
Well, she is.
But yeah, I'm gonna be quiet because she didn't. Then she turned around and became an advocate for women of color in the hospital setting, and like turned around and made that a huge campaign. I thought it was
she definitely put a spotlight on that.
Right.
So let's
Unfortunately,
hear from a couple of folks. Oh, sorry, Tisha.
go ahead.
The data presented was very interesting. I would like to see, or part of my own research, I guess, rather would be the consumer side or the individuals being served side. What is that? We see what those numbers show, but I'm curious to show the correlation of the access or the resources of individuals that look like those population and how they represent on the professional end and how that makes a factor or is a contributing factor to what that data shows.
Yeah. That's something I'd love to work with you on, Nicoya. I'm very interested in that as well.
Hey, I'd like to say something. I noticed a difference when it came to people over 25, the different ethnic groups. There's one other person in my group, I can't recall, Justo, maybe you remember, she was at the top. Anyway, she was a trained chef as I am myself, and knowing something about the different foods that those groups eat, especially Pacific Islanders and Asians, their indigenous foods, it seems to me that even those over 25, they're eating a little bit healthier because of the indigenous foods they might have been raised on, more seafood, more fruits, more vegetables versus the other groups. But I noticed that was a big difference, and very surprised that those over 25 Hispanics was at the bottom. So to me, that was pretty interesting.
Well, in our next session, we're going to hear from Marilyn Hemingway, who is going to talk about these like historic foodways and how they can be healthy, right? So we're going to have a little bit of time in a breakout room. What we'd like for you to discuss is, so now we have this information, right? What can we do? And was anything surprising or off-putting or saddening to you? And so we're going to take about how long, Katie?
I think we should do about 7 minutes like we did before. Come back to a little bit and then get into unconscious bias. Because I'd love to give Ed a little extra time at the end of the day if we can.
So we'll be back at what y'all are 10:33. Is that right? Okay.
Food organizations, they've said if you have a drive-through, they won't let you in the county. And so we kind of talked about that in our group as well, that, who's making the decisions and how do we get those changes in our community? Because we had the exact same thing. We had a Bojangles, they cleared a lot across the street from it. And everyone was excited in the community and guessing something fairly healthy. And we got Church's Chicken and Long John Silver's. And actually, interestingly enough, 6 months later, they closed both locations.
Oh my gosh.
Ugly, empty buildings.
Right. Dawn, were you about to say something?
Well, I was going to say a comment that stands out to me in the chat is one about advocators not receiving support from those that they advocate for, which is just stood out to me, but also sort of related to our discussion that we were having on food swamps, and like especially in the area that I'm in, surveys are taken, asking the people about healthy food choices in the area, and the response from a lot of people is, we want this fast food and that fast food place, and we already have a ton of them. And for those of us in the work of trying to bring more healthy access, and then talking to the people and they say, well, we want another fast food place, and just like not understanding where that disconnect is, or the fact that they look at it as like, well, it's quick, it's cheap, it's right here next to me, I don't have to go far for it. And like, how do we kind of stop that, but also kind of retract some of what's already happened in the area?
So Dawn, what you need to have are some community listening sessions, some conversations with those communities. It's not that they don't want good health, And I think a series of listening sessions would do a lot of good work there, but really listening, right? Because y'all, one of the best parts about having to be in Mississippi is that anybody ever had crystals?
Love them.
Yeah. You know, like I want some crystals sometimes, right? But I also want the option to be able to have a nice big salad. So I think options is and opportunities. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Kelsey. And thank y'all so much for this great conversation. There's never long enough.
Yes, thank you all so much for this great discussion, for the energy that you're bringing to this meeting so far. My name is Kelsey Sanders. If I haven't met you before, I'm the Community Relations Manager at Holspire, and we, along with the Office of Rural Health, are sponsoring or hosting this training. We're very grateful for Zenger Strategies and their team and all the work that they do. Just so grateful for this information and this opportunity to bring everybody together. So one of the things that we value at Holspire, and it is a policy of ours, is the opportunity to take a physical activity break when we're having long meetings. So to give you an opportunity to, yes, stand up and stretch, use the restroom, fill your water bottle, get another cup of coffee, whatever you need, but also to provide you a little bit of more structure of something that you could do. So I'm going to actually share my screen and share a short workout video is too strong, but a lead exercise from a really great group that I found. And you can turn your camera off and go along with us. If you want to leave your camera on, please feel free to.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody got a chance to stretch, move those limbs around. We're going to jump right into it. I know from the pre-assessments, a lot of you said you've known a lot of information about DEI. Who knows about what unconscious bias is? Say, take yourself off mute, type it in the chat. Let us know what when you hear unconscious bias, what does that mean to you? Has anybody heard of unconscious bias? I see heads nodding. What does that mean to you when you hear that? Oh, okay. Quick assumptions, stereotyping. Yeah. A lot of times people think, oh, well, you know what? You've got to be a bad person to have a bias. People don't want to associate themselves with a bias, but it's really just about those unconscious biases that we have that are formed at a very, very young age, and they're reinforced throughout our lives. There may be attitudes, stereotypes, any kind of beliefs from our circle of people, the media. There's all sorts of imageries that reinforce our attitudes and our stereotypes and our understanding. And all of that forms an unconscious way of thinking. It impacts how we treat people and how we judge people. Now, having a bias, an unconscious bias, is by no means makes you a bad person. All that means is that we're human and we're wired that way. I like peanut butter and jelly. There might be somebody who likes Nutella and jelly. I mean, you know, somebody might like Nike, somebody might like, you know, Adidas. You might be a meat eater versus a vegetable, you know, vegetarian. We all have our biases, but there are also some assumptions that come with unconscious bias, that people say, oh, you know what? I'm a good person. I'm a person of faith. I do great deeds in the community. So I don't have bias. I couldn't possibly have a bias. Or, hey, you know what? I know what my unconscious bias are, and I got rid of them because I don't even see color. So I can't possibly have a bias. Or, you know, It's normal, everybody has them, and there's really not a lot that we can do about it. But there is a lot we can do about it, and awareness that we actually have them. We all have them, and it doesn't make us a bad person, but that awareness allows us to stop and change those attitudes. So now, where does this come from? Why do we have unconscious biases? Well, we can thank neuroscientists for doing a lot of research, and we're pulling some of the information that comes from the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University. And what they learned is that with the brain, we are hardwired to have some biases. And a lot of that comes from a survival, a period of survival to keep us safe. You think back in the caveman days when the dinosaurs were roaming and you had warring tribes, you needed to be able to identify pretty quickly, friend or foe. And so that's one of the mechanisms that our brain is constantly using to keep us safe. We're bombarded with tons of information every day. We're getting stimuli from everywhere you look. Just a quick guess. How many of you know how much information our brain receives on a daily basis? Like, what's your best guess? How much data? You can put it in the chat, take yourself off mute. How much information do you think our brain is bombarded with on a daily basis? Too much, yes, too much. Oh, Katie says billions of thoughts. Yes, Katie, billions of thoughts. Anybody else? Kelsey, so much. You're right. 30,000 thoughts a day, Brianna. Okay. Would it surprise you to know that we get anywhere from 10 to 11 million pieces of data every second of every day? Okay, marinate in that for a minute. Let me repeat it. We receive 10 to 11 million pieces of data every second of every day. Right now, you're sitting here, you're listening to my voice. You might hear the noise in the other room. You can feel the lint, piece of lint that, graces your finger. You're looking at your screen, you're looking at the chat. There's a billion of things going on in our brains right now. But of the 10 to 11 million pieces, how much do you think we can consciously process? What's your best guess? We're getting 10 to 11 million pieces every second, every day. How much are we really focusing and thinking about and absorbing? Nicoya says 10. Katie? 100, a few hundred? Okay, Samantha. We actually can only process anywhere from 30 to 40 items. That's it. So you do the math. Out of the 10 to 11 million, we're only consciously processing 30 to 50 pieces of items. Where does the rest of that information go? Yeah. Oh, Deborah, you said 1 million. Okay. Our brains would explode if we could process that much stuff. But our brain is almost like it's a database. And it just houses all of that information, processes that little bit that it can, and then it just stores it up in the cloud until we actually need it. And a lot of times when we are processing that data, let's say if the body and the mind realizes that, hey, you're in danger, or you're in a pressure situation where you need information pretty fast, or a decision needs to be made pretty fast, the brain will go back in this little catalog and pull out some information that we need. So like, for instance, if we see a red hot stove, do we have to stop and think about it? No, we know instantly anything that's red denotes danger. Stay away. If we run across a snake pops out on our walk, do we stop and think about red next to black? What's the little rhyme? Does anybody know the little rhyme? Red next to black.
Friend to Jack, red next to yellow. Scary fellow.
Is our brain telling us to stop and analyze that snake and look at it and consciously think about the rhyme? Or what's our brain telling us to do in that instance? Right? Yeah, run, danger, your heart's racing, fight, flight or fight. We're ready to get out of there because we're in danger. And that's what the brain does. But it tricks us because there's a disconnect between what we have in our heart versus what the brain is trying to do to keep us out of danger and survive. And unfortunately, you can be a good person and your unconscious bias can make you think and act and respond in a completely different way that is the opposite of what you have in your heart or your moral values. And that's part of the bias, shame, and guilt, is that we don't understand, well, I know I'm a good person. I'd give the person a shirt off my back. Why did I respond the way that I did? Why did I act that way? But here's the beauty of it all. We can change. We can establish some new wiring ways of thinking with unconscious bias. And part of that is just the awareness that we're all human and we do all have our biases. It still doesn't make you a bad person, but being aware of it, we can change the way we think. We can pause when we're having one of those moments where we're thinking about or saying or doing something that conflicts with our morals and our values. And so we can create a new pathway. Okay, enough of the talking. Let's jump into an exercise so that you can see what that looks like. Ooh. First exercise. I'm going to set it up for you. I'm going to show you a paragraph, and I would like everyone to take themselves off of mute, okay? And as soon as you see it, I want you to just start reading, okay? Are we all ready? Let's see, is that the one? Go.
If you can read this paragraph,
summarize a big information in a way that
our conscious control. Minds do it automatically without our conscious control.
Okay. What did you guys observe? What did you observe there?
That we're geniuses.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You're a genius. What did you notice?
Some of the letters are rearranged. They're backwards.
There's tons of misspellings all throughout this paragraph. But what else did you notice?
That we were able to read it effortlessly. Like we didn't have to really stop and say, oh, and rearrange it. Like our mind naturally did it for us.
Oh, Brianna, you hit the nail on the head. No one stuttered. I mean, you guys sailed right through that. Nobody had to stop and, scramble words around and figure out what it was. Everybody read through it pretty easily. And why do you think
some of them had to be right though?
Well,
the first letter has to be right on every word or else you're going to be thrown off.
But how were you able to just kind of I mean, because you didn't stop. I didn't hear anybody stop or pause. You just kind of kept going. You looked at it and kept going. What was happening?
Weirdly, I felt like I read it more. Maybe I have dyslexia. I don't know, because I felt like I read it more clearly than I read when it is correct.
Well, Brianna, speaking about dyslexia, though, really quickly, we do want to acknowledge that this could be the norm for some folks with dyslexia. Like, this is normal for a quote unquote normal brain, but those neurodivergent folks, this can be a little, this is different for them.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
It's almost like our mind thinks ahead.
Yeah, and it does it in lightning fast speed without us even thinking about it. No one had to even think about it. You just kind of kept going through it. But what the brain is doing is it's pulling out of that database in the cloud. It's pulling information that you've learned that it has paired together. Those misspelled words you've seen 100 times, thousands of times in your lifetime. And so there's a point of reference that it was pulling from. And I'm sure when we're taught a lot of things, we pair things together and our brain does that for us. So without us even having to think about it, the brain took care of that for us. And it does it that quickly. Okay, let's try another exercise, but this time, let me set this up for you. I'm going to show you 2 columns of words. And because the brain works really fast, to simulate that, I need you to read the words that you're going to see as quickly as you can. Okay, we're going to try to be like our brain and read it very fast. You'll start off with the first column of words, and then you'll move to the second column of words. Okay, here we go. Oh, and take yourselves off of mute. I want to hear you as you're reading.
Red, blue, orange, brown, green, blue, orange, red, brown, red.
Orange, red, green, red.
Very good. Okay, no trouble there. All right. I'm going to show you another set of words. This time the instructions are going to be a little different. When you see the set 2 columns of words, instead of reading the word itself, I want you to say out loud the color you see on the word. Does that make sense? Don't read the word, just read the color of the word. All right. And I need you to do it as fast as you can. Okay. We're simulating the speed of the brain. So when I flip it, I want everyone to just read as fast as possible the color of the word. Go.
Brown,
Blue,
green, red,
red, brown,
red,
red,
brown, orange,
red, yellow,
brown, green,
yellow,
yellow.
Okay, you guys, the facial expressions were just cracking me up here.
Lower.
What did you guys observe? What happened? What happened this go around?
Lower.
It was slower, yeah.
It was harder to separate the word versus the color.
Yeah.
What was happening with your brain? What was your brain telling you?
Like, throw this out, it's not right.
It was confused. The brain was overloaded.
The brain says, "Hey, come on, we got a pairing. We got a match for that. You don't have to think about it, but you did have to think about it." Yes, you really almost had to silence your brain so that you can think about it. And that's what unconscious bias does to us. We know in our heart the right thing to say and do and act, but the brain wants to do something else. But this is where the rewiring comes in. You can pause, just like you did to your brain. You had to pause it, stop the noise, and really focus and concentrate and use your cognitive skills to figure things out. And with practice, just like anything else, the more you do it, the more of a habit you form and the easier it becomes to do it. Does that mean we get rid of all of our biases? No, but it's a work in progress, and you just have to be aware and keep doing it. I'm looking at
Letitia, do you think, Letitia, do you think that there is, that age makes a difference?
You know what? I'm sure for some it may, but I think what's that expression? You can't teach an old dog a new trick. I disagree with that. We've had many of these conversations being going on, facilitated, and we've had, you know, some senior seasoned people, and they say, you know what, I thought a certain way when I was, you know, growing up, and I've learned a lot about myself, and I've made some changes. So
Tisha, I'm going to make one quick note. Dr. Zora Smith-Denson, the research on brain plasticity, which is like your ability for your brain to change, has changed significantly in the past 5 to 10 years. They're learning so much. And so many things that they thought that older brains were not capable of are fully capable of changing now. So the science is changing. And so we should not let age be a barrier for us to learn new things.
So no more excuses then.
No more excuses. No more excuses. Now, what did they say? When you know better, you do better. Yeah.
Tamara has a hand up.
Yeah. I wanted to share, I had actually done one of these unconscious bias. I did one on the computer where you click with the mouse, and I was trying, I wanted to get them right. So it took me so long to do it, because a lot of it's based on time when you do the ones on the computer, and it gave me an error message. And then at the end, it was like, you have a complete bias against, I think we were doing one on people with disabilities, but I was like, but I was trying to get them right. And you almost couldn't get it right, even if you tried. And so it just kind of goes to show that, you know, we're not bad folks. We know what's kind of right from wrong, but certain things are just ingrained in you that it takes a long time to uncover.
Right. Well, you think about it. We form these stereotypes and associations throughout our entire lives. And
Does
so
anybody have a particular affinity for orange hats and shirts, or garnet and black? Anybody have a belief in somebody wearing an orange shirt?
Does that elicit a response when you see somebody with either of those
Clemson colors?
Yeah. So do we have Katie, how are we doing on time? Do we have a minute or two?
So we can do, it is 11:15, which is exactly right on time to break for lunch, unless you want to do maybe 2 more minutes, because we would like to get back by 11:30 so that we can hear from Dr. Ed Lee and hear him talk about cultural humility and his experiences with that.
Well, let's go ahead and head for lunch. Let everybody get something in their bellies.
Great.
Join me in welcoming someone who has become, to me, a dear friend and a trusted co-advocate, co-conspirator for justice. I am forever trying to bring him in on anything I'm working on. So just this right here is the power of cold email. Several years ago, I was working on, I believe it was the 2nd annual Equity Summit, and I was looking for people in Columbia, Atlanta, Birmingham, and Jackson, Mississippi, who were on the ground doing social justice work. And so I found Ed and just emailed Dr. Ed Lee at Emory, who was and is the Senior Director of Inclusivity for Emory's University's College of Arts and Sciences, and said, hey, I love your work. Would you be willing to talk? And yes, And 3 years later, we are still bouncing ideas off each other, working together. And I have to tell you, if anyone understands the power of words and the power of communication, it is Dr. Ed Lee. He has since, he is the owner and principal creative for Conversely. So if you need someone, if your organization wants someone to, in his words, cultivate your collective genius through improved communication and collaboration strategies, he is your person. He is an award-winning debate coach and a restless advocate for public debate and dialogue. He is a national media commentator and has been seen on CNN discussing presidential debate strategies and their impact on national politics. And I can't wait to hear from him in the near future of the fact that the RNC has decided that they are not going to debate anymore when it comes to presidential elections. So I'm sure he's got some great thoughts on that. But he today is going to talk to us about just how important community conversations and cultural humility are. And with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Ed Lee III.
Thank you. This is one of those where I'm always weirded out to hear someone talk about me or describe me in particular terms, particularly in these sort of formal settings, because the words that get used are rarely the words in which I see myself. I am someone who, after this, is going to walk outside and play Pokemon Go. That I am someone who spends a bunch of time dealing with imposter syndrome, because I'm not quite sure I can live up to the billing or expectations that people have. But I thank you for the kind words. And yes, I do consider this relationship that we've cultivated over the last 3 years a partnership that I hope will continue, because I am a much better human because you have entered into my life. So much love and much appreciated. Here's our roadmap for our time together. That one is that I want to talk about who I really am, really. And then I think that that's an important frame for us to have conversations about cultural humility and building communities. I also then want us to explore the relationship between communication and community building. And for me, I think that there is very much an intimate and integral relationship between those two concepts. Then I would like for us to think about cultural humility as a path forward for building more effective and responsive communities. We'll spend about 30 minutes there, and then we'll break into small groups and apply some of those concepts to a particular area of practice. And then we'll come back and have a large group session and conversation together. And so, who are we really? Stuart Hall is a sociologist who's spent the vast majority of his intellectual life in the UK, but was Jamaican born. And Stuart Hall believes that our true selves are hidden. In fact, the most important aspects of who we are really not things that we share with other people, particularly other people we don't know or don't trust or feel will use those hidden important aspects of who we are against us. But those hidden and internal aspects of who we are governs our behavior and governs how we participate in community together. So being able to figure out who we really are is ultimately important for us developing connections and relationships with each other. So who am I really? One, I am influenced by the 5 women I spent in a household with growing up. I was the only male. I was raised primarily by my grandmother. My mother worked at night as a nurse, and I had 2 sisters and a niece who arrived very early on in my life. and that those 5 women still rest on my shoulder on a daily basis, informing how I show up and the way in which I participate in conversations. They particularly show up when I'm in predominantly male environments where those men did not have the honor and privilege of being raised by my grandmother. So I tend to participate in conversations very different from the ways in which others are gendered how I am. I also believe that we should get closer, that we need to figure out how do we share ideas with each other and how do we create both reduction in the amount of knowledge that we have about each other, but being willing to participate in more proximate relationships that far too often distance, whether we're talking about physically or ideologically, become a way in which we create a knowing and misknowing that makes it very difficult for us to build community. I also try to stay curious about the world. This is the debater inside of me. I found the right job, that I really love the idea that I am constantly involved in learning, thinking about new things, people introducing new books to me. One of the more recent books that I read was this book by Mary Roach that was called Stiff, which is on the history of cadavers. And so I will read about anything, particularly things that I don't know. And I am particularly curious about people who see the world in ways that are just off kilter to how I see it, because I know that that means they have experienced things in ways that I haven't, and that there's an opportunity for me to learn. Additionally, much like all of you, I want to help communities to become more effective and equitable. How do we bring people together so that we can mine the gifts and talents of those who are amongst us and use that as a wellspring for creating inclusive and equitable responses to the most wicked challenges that we have in our community? Whether we're talking about the health disparities that we were discussing earlier, or climate change, or the ways in which there are just significant gaps that are increasing in income inequalities in our society, I don't think any of those things can be addressed if we're not figuring out strategies of bringing people together who have different ways of seeing, hearing, and experiencing the world. So I want to help communities do that. I also believe that community is ultimately just a series of conversations, that when we talk about building communities, sustaining communities, ultimately, what I think we're saying is that we need to change the kinds of conversations that are occurring amongst those who have close proximity with each other. We need to think about who's showing up to those conversations. We need to think about what subjects we choose to talk about in those conversations. We need to think about the settings in which we're willing to have those conversations. Are we inviting people to drive many of hours after they have worked long days in order to participate in the community building practices? Or are we showing up to where they already are? Are we asking the most vulnerable in order to make more sacrifices? Are we asking those with the most privileges within our communities to make more sacrifices in order for that diverse, inclusive engagement to take place? Those are important elements in understanding whether we have community and what that looks like. So those fundamental questions about who, what, and where conversations take place, I think, are at the heart of what we mean when we say community. Unfortunately, I just don't think that we are all that good at being together. I don't think that we are all that good at figuring out how to make and sustain and build community, and that we are challenged in a couple of different ways. that for the learned among us, those who have been fortunate enough to show up to the best and brightest universities and intellectual communities, we think that all that we need is more and better evidence, and to then go into a setting and show our brilliance to other people, that we fundamentally all too often believe that evidence is the answer. The problem is that they have not heard our brilliance, or they are unwilling to listen to our brilliance. And if that's how we're showing up, we are not engaged in a practice of building and sustaining community. We are far more involved in a more ego-involved process that is about finding an audience who are willing to experience the theater of our brilliance. That is not the basis of building sustainable community engagement that solves the problem. It is an ego-involved activity that allows for us to feel better about who we are without making any sustainable changes. The other challenge that we have is that we believe that all we have to do far too often is to dominate and impose our truth. We have found the truth, and that if we can just impose it upon other people by interrupting them, by exercising the authority and power that's been bestowed upon us, or either just aggressively discrediting their ideas or beliefs, or at times just speaking a little bit louder, that's all that's needed. And so in our communication, particularly when there's slippage between us in what we're trying to achieve, or there's conflict, what ends up happening is that we choose to dominate instead of listen. We choose to impose our truths instead of mining opportunities for us to develop a shared third space and a shared third opportunity of how do we move forward. So most of our engagements are challenged by one of these two things. We either think more evidence is needed, or we think that we can just impose our truth on other people. And unfortunately, both of those are failures because they ignore one of the primary motivators for our existence. And that's emotions. That's how we feel. That there was a study that was done among conflict negotiators, two researchers who were studying conflict negotiators, and that they were interested in how the two parties showed up and what was important for whether or not a resolution was involved or came to in that conflict. And that there were in each of the elements of how it is that people thought about the person who was the negotiator, how they thought about the other people on the other side, how they thought about the end result. The primary thing that guided their understanding were their feelings, their emotional response to the issue. And so when we're thinking about building community, this sort of soft, squishy pieces of the emotion, that driver, pathos, as Aristotle would say, is something that we tend to ignore, but we ignore it at our detriment because many of us, I'm not alone here, I will cut my nose off to spite my face if I feel bad about the relationship and the people who I'm with. I could logically come to the conclusion that those are smart folks, they have the right answer, I should do that thing. But if I feel disrespected, if I feel like you are not honoring me and how I show up, ain't no way I'm paying attention to you. And I am going to do my best to prove you wrong, even if that means I suffer in the interim. That's irrational, but it's emotional. And it is a true driver of who we are. So if we want to build collaborative enterprises and experiences, we have to tend to the emotional needs that we have as both individuals and a group. There was a National Academy of Science study that indicated that there are 27 emotions that move us. Some are positive, some are negative, A couple of them were identified as neutral, but all of them are emotions that when they well up inside of us, they can cause us to take a particular action. Some of the positive emotions that if we feel admired or appreciated, if we are in awe of other people, if there's a sense of nostalgia or a sense of relief or satisfaction about what has occurred, those can be positive emotional responses that get us to take action. There are also some other negative emotions that can drive us. If we're angry, or there's a sense of anxiety, if there's disgust, or there's fear, when we become sad, those also can encourage us to take action in a way that shuts off that desire for us to be more rational, for us to engage in logos, but it's also a driver. And there are a couple that they found that were sort of neutral. They can be positive and negative, that the act of surprising people can serve as something that motivates them. And sexual desire, we both can identify places in which those are both positive and negative. These aren't things that you have to sort of memorize, but the reason I share them is because there are various ways in which how we communicate with people, how we set up an environment, a setting for engagement, can create the condition in which they are willing to listen to us, they are willing to heed to our suggestions about how they comport themselves and ask. And all too often, and maybe not all too often, because that indicates that we probably couldn't do this, but many a times it's driven by these set of emotional responses. And so how we show up will inform their responses. How we show up as advocates, how we show up as practitioners, how we tap into the notion of whether or not we see them as collaborative partners who we admire, appreciate, value their contribution and intellect will inform their response. Because if we show up and our actions disseminate a set of ideas that we don't think they're smart enough to make decisions, we actually think the way in which they comport themselves is disgusting, and that we're fearful of who they are and the actions that they may take, that will send a different set of messages and actually could produce a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we need to be attentive to the emotional frames that we are producing and encouraging people to operate from. This is also a place where identity matters, because the way in which we show up is informed by our experiences in the world, that ultimately identity provides a foundation for how we make meaning in the world. I can't exist other than a Black man who was born and raised in the South, hanging out with a bunch of women who were unwilling to hide their fears about violence and their conversations about menstrual cycles from me. That's who I am. That's how I was raised. I was raised by a grandmother who grew up during the Great Depression and dealt with the struggles of not having enough food. So she was quite frugal and hid the toilet paper from us when we were using too much. And we constantly had dinners that were made of nothing but biscuits and gravy, because that's what she grew up eating. And that frugality sits on me to this day in the way in which I show up. And that's not saying that that is the experiences of everyone, or that that needs to be universalized. That's saying if you want to understand who I am, how to communicate with me, you need to understand those set of issues and that identity. Because that identity, those sets of experiences constructs the cultural lens that I operate from. Our cultural lenses are like our eyeglasses. They inform what we can see. Now that I've taken these off, I can't really see anything because I'm just blind. But when I put them back on, things become a little clearer. But it also indicates that while I think that I'm seeing a little bit better, that better means that I have a tendency to ignore the blind spots that I have. So the more we improve at this, the more likely we are to think that we are perfect at this and start to ignore the blind spots that are there. And so it's important for us to understand that we make sense of the world in very different ways based upon our history and experiences. They inform how we see. They inform how we interpret the world. Depending upon where I show up and would have this conversation, some people would interpret the picture on the left as a person, Angela Davis, who was a cop killer, killed a police officer, was on the run, and got off on it. Others would interpret that human as a freedom fighter, someone who is the world's most preeminent scholar, getting us to challenge the way in which we think about penal systems and to think about a world in which we no longer use prisons and incarceration as the primary means in which we think about notions of safety and security. Those are different ways of conceptualizing the same human beings. Some people interpret the Statue of Liberty as a beacon of freedom, as a refuge for those who are yearning to be free, and others view the Statue of Liberty as a symbol, not of hope, but of an imposition of power and authority throughout the world that dismisses the needs of the most vulnerable in other parts of the world. Very different interpretations. To our right, our former president, Donald Trump. Some would identify him as someone who doesn't quite understand the needs of people who are not white, male, and wealthy, and others would interpret him as the only politician to get their needs over the last several decades. And while flawed in many ways, was willing to listen and willing to act on behalf of those who have not been listened to previously. Very different ways of seeing three different symbols, but all of those ways and differences are driven by experiences and history. So if we want to understand people and how we communicate with them, we need to understand their experiences and their history. This also plays out in thinking about healthcare, in thinking about the way in which we go about doing public health. Harriet Washington is a medical ethicist and wrote this amazing book in 2007. If you have an opportunity to read it, I strongly suggest you do. What Harriet Washington does is that she traces the history of the way in which medical experimentation has taken place in this country in dealing with Black folks from the colonial periods to the present. And what Harriet Washington would argue is that our focus on the Tuskegee experiment is, yes, a dark time in our nation's history, but one we shouldn't fixate on, because there is a continued engagement of people that dismisses their needs, that denies that they are human beings who are capable of making their own choices, and that we shouldn't use them as instruments in order to improve the livelihood of others who are not like them. And that history of medical experimentation is one that has produced a very rational fear within Black folks of medical institutions and people who operate within them. And so that history, those experiences, inform the way in which medical practitioners, many of you who are participating in this conversation with me today, are viewed by Black folks within the communities that you are supporting, members of, and participating in. And if we are interested in having an open, frank, earnest conversation with them about their particular needs, that history has to be understood and responded to. And so what can we do? One is that I think that we need to err on the side of listening. I think that that is particularly true for those of us who identified with the patina, are identified with the notion of being experts, who are dripping with credentials and with certifications that we can lean on as reasons why we get to talk, and that we talk far too often without listening to those we want to be in conversation with and we genuinely want to support. The other is that we should need to be more humble inquirers. And by that, I think we need to think about how do we operate with a sense of compassion, grace, and understanding. And all of that starts with listening, not hearing, but listening. Hearing is just an audible sensation that happens. It occurs whether or not we're being attentive to it. Listening is intentionally striving to understand the readers, your conversation partner's history, their understanding into the world, and what brought them to this place that they are at right now. It's not necessarily agreeing with it, but striving to understand it and focusing on being attentive to them. So let's operate with a sense of compassion, grace, and understanding. And I think that that necessarily involves listening. Let's demonstrate agreeableness to the perspective that others are identifying. Let's acknowledge our own personal faults and mistakes and limitations. None of us have 100% of the information. We talked about bias earlier. Bias just means being partial, being incomplete. All of us are partial and incomplete because we don't have a totality of the experiences that could possibly exist in the world. So we should be willing to say, hey, here are the mistakes that I've made because I didn't see the world in the ways that others did. And here's why I'm interested in taking on and embracing a perspective that's different from my own. Let's acknowledge the uncertainty that exists within what we are proposing and the way that we see the world. Science is inherently a process that is constantly evolving and improving and getting better. That means there's inherent uncertainty within the proposals that we are making. Let's acknowledge that and invite people to participate in mining and interrogating that uncertainty. Most importantly here, can we be other-oriented? Can we create spaces for others to give voice to their ideas, their understandings of the world? What do they really value? Can we create space where we can talk about not just what they said they wanted? I want McDonald's. I want Burger King. I want Long John Silver's. But what is the value that they are pursuing? I want convenience. I want options. I want control over my dietary practices. That's very different from talking about one particular food outlet and instead talking about the values that's guiding those choices. Because if we can connect to the values that are there, then people will make decisions that are along the lines of more sustainable engagement, more nutritious forms of dietary habits, which is what those of us who have the luxury of having information, having affordable food that's in our communities that doesn't just constitute fast food. Acknowledge the merits of countervailing perspectives. Just because we disagree within the cost and benefit analysis that we engage in, whatever that looks like, doesn't mean there's not something that's meritorious about the other side of the ledger. So can we acknowledge that and use that as a bridge of commonality in order to move forward? And can we create an equal position for the people we are in conversations with? Don't feel or display our superiority, whatever the basis in which that comes from, that this is a shared moment that we're having. We are in commune. Commune means together. We are there together. And to be together means that we have to be willing to listen, create space for our partners to articulate their needs and concerns, and be willing to compromise. And so, to be a humble inquirer is to act with compassion and grace, understanding and listening, demonstrate agreeableness, but most importantly, figure out strategies for how do we open up space for our conversation partners who see, think, and process the world in ways that are different from our own. And so to set up our group conversations, what I would like to do is show a short video of about 3 minutes that is Harriet Washington. And what I'm interested in our group conversations being about is what is a culturally humble concern, culturally humble response to the concerns that Harriet Washington speaks to about how the system creates abuses. What is a culturally humble response to these concerns about the system's prior and present abuses?
Yes, the very focus on mistrust in the African-American community implies that there's something pathological about the way African-Americans are thinking or behaving. And unfortunately, it takes the focus away from the real issue, which is the system. We have a healthcare system which is repeatedly and consistently shown it can't be trusted. It's not trustworthy. And so in order to regain trust, or regain is a wrong verb because it never gained in the first place, but in order to instill trust, be trustworthy, we need to redouble our efforts and focus on crafting a healthcare system that is devoid of the errors and biases and the basically the abuses of the past and present. And if we do that, I think we'll find that people will flock to it and we'll no longer have to address any question of mistrust.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, during this time of COVID, there are examples in which, Black folks and probably other folks of color have experienced, but especially Black men, in walking into institutions and trying to walk into institutions and having experiences. Have you heard of any of those?
Exactly. I'm thinking in particular of Black men who have both been ejected from banks and stores by security guards and police who say they look like criminals wearing their mask, and barred entry or accosted by police for not wearing a mask. In New York City, on the same day, you had police officers smilingly handing out masks to white people who didn't have one, while they harassed and threatened with arrest African Americans who were not wearing a mask. And so this blame the victim mentality is so pervasive, but that's only one example of it. Other examples include things like even healthcare professionals, exhorting African Americans to observe social distancing. Well, the Surgeon General said that, but he must have known that a good 40% of the people who are essential workers can't practice social distancing. They can't avoid riding or driving the subway. They can't avoid contact with the public in their jobs in restaurants or cleaning hospitals, So exhorting them to behave in a way that they can't behave is abusive. Also, mass transit, another good example. If you live in a crowded tenement in New York City, you cannot social distance. You can't avoid sharing the hallways and elevators. And yet, I remember seeing a legislator in New York City writing potential policy saying that risks are partly dictated by where people choose to live. I wrote back, nobody chooses to live in a tenement in Harlem. Correct. People are forced there by policies like redlining and other types of mortgage exclusion. So we have to acknowledge that our system is putting people at risk and not blaming them for risks that they can't control.
Absolutely. And you're mentioning kind of the heaviness of what structural racism is, this reinforcing these mutual systems, reinforcing themselves that carry burden and harm onto people.
Exactly.
So Harriet Washington would say that the system's present and prior abuses will inform the way in which many of your community members will see you, how they interpret how you show up, and where you're coming from. So I will open up for our small group conversation. What would be a culturally humble way to start to chip away at some of those concerns that your community members have, are ways in which you can start to address some of the ways in which prior and present abuses of the system is informing how they see you and the work that you are trying to do within your community?
Excellent. I'm typing that up, since that's it's a powerful question, but it's also complicated. I think people are going to need to go back to it. So I've spelled abuses wrong, and y'all will just be okay with that. So we're going to break y'all out, I think, into your same instruction groups. Excuse me, the same groups from before. Rachel, are you ready to do that?
I am, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to put these in the chat right now. So hopefully you should be able to see those. I can also put them in a message as we go through. So what, Ed, do you want to say it one more time? I think I got it right in the chat.
Harriet Washington spoke of this as there are systemic abuses that throughout our history and with our present environment that will inform how many of your community members see you as public practitioners advocating for health, healthcare, healthy communities. What are some culturally humble, culturally sensitive ways that you can engage that starts to chip away at some of those concerns, or helps to create a new frame that those folks are operating from?
Excellent, excellent. All right, everybody, ready to go? Let's go. Ed, would you like to join a room? Okay, great.
Bye, friends.
Bye, Bingo. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had some good discussion in the chat. Ed, I'm going to happily let you lead this discussion from the breakout, but just quickly so that we can have as much time through the end of the day, since we want to end at 12:30. I am just want to share the meeting evaluation, so you can use your phone. We're all used to QR codes now, so you can go ahead and do that on the screen. And then also the link, Rachel has just put the link to that evaluation. Really, really important for us to get your feedback, and so that we can, make sure that the second session is really as high quality as possible. So thank you so much for participating. I know it's not quite the end of the meeting, but go ahead and have this at hand. We'll also send an email with this later on. Also want to remind you about the date for the next meeting is the 26th. We're going to have the wonderful Marilyn Hemingway from the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. We're also going to talk with some folks who have already done some work around DEI in their coalitions and talk about their experiences. We're going to have a panel of other coalition members, and Dr. Pam M. and Dr. Antonio Boyd are going to talk about stakeholder engagement and the continuum of collaboration, which will be a really great exercise, very action-oriented stuff. And we'll continue to have these interactive activities and discussions. So we're looking forward to that. So thanks for having such a great discussion in your group. And Ed, I'll let you take it away now.
So I hope that your engagement was as scintillating and enjoyable and knowledgeable as mine. I have some notes that I took that I'm definitely going to apply that I learned from my fellow travelers. So what I'm interested in here are, based on your conversations, what was an aha moment or an idea that someone shared that you think was a moment of brilliance that our collective should hear from, or that I should, or even if there's a question that you have that you want to throw out to the group. So this is sort of open-ended in choose your adventure. So this is an opportunity to engage. what I will do to make sure that we take advantage of our time together, I'm going to invite Danielle, who I had to come out, was part of the group I talked with, to please share some of the thoughts that she had. And I'm particularly interested in that conversation, that piece that you share about being on the job versus being in the community. And because I think that would be helpful in framing some of this as we move forward, but it was also a good way for me to think about some of the work that I do.
Okay, well, we were talking and I was just saying that, you know, sometimes when you're out in the community, Ms. Trinish made the statement, well, she said that, you know, being out there, sometimes in the communities you were raised in, you figure, you know, even though I'm on the job, I already have that way of being in there that people are going to respect me, they're going to talk to me. And so, you know, I thought that as well. Then I get out there, and what you don't understand is even though you're out in the community that you're serving and that's the community you live in and was brought up in, you're still on your job. And even if you, like when I'm asking questions and sometimes they don't understand it, so I have to break it down another way, I'll ask that question, hey, well, how can I reword this question for future references? And we were talking about how can you, you know, differentiate from like being out in the community and while working, because those people still look at you though, even though they know you or seen you around, you're still on the job. So you're still talking to them about something they don't know about or don't want to know about, or they just feel like you feel like you're better than them because you're on the job. So I guess I was just saying, show up at different events, you know, even though it doesn't pertain to your job. Like Ms. Trinish was saying, the Easter egg hunt that the community does. Show up, get out there, run, jump, laugh, play, even when it doesn't have to do with you, so that they see your face and you gain that trust with your community. Like, hey, they're really out here to help us, or they're really out here just being themselves while trying to teach us and help us. So that was pretty much what I said.
Thank you. Others, either reaction to that or other thoughts that you have?
I would definitely love to piggyback off that, because that goes back to what we were discussing in my group, is the relationship piece. Anytime you're taking any type of community action, you know, if, like she said, whether you're part of the community or not, they need to know that the steps that you're taking are for their best interest. So there needs to be that trust piece there. And in order to build that trust, you have to first build the relationship. Relationship is key. So it requires you to be present in the community. You have to be present even when you're not required to. You have to invest that time in the community. They need to see you, you know, if you get a call that they're in need, you know, that you show up. You know, they just need to know that you're there and that they can truly trust you and that you're truly invested in the future of that community and building without any other motive or anything to gain. It has to be selfless and it has to show through your actions.
Thank you. Thank you. So presence leading to trust, better relationships, being a part of the community first, health professional, health expert second. That we're more likely to value, be attentive to your expertise if we think that you are present with me and want to be in relationship with me. Excellent, excellent. Others?
The one thing I will add is sort of what I talked about, the relationship not being one way. Sometimes when you may be coming from a coalition perspective or organizational perspective, we may always call on communities to be a part of a listening session or to help implement this program or help with this strategy. And if a community is calling upon you or your organization to do something that may not normally be in your wheelhouse, being able to give space for that and ensure the relationship is not one-sided is something I wanted to add to that.
Yeah. That feels like great advice to me, because it also helps to counter the notion that the relationship is transactional, that it's one-to-one. I'm giving something to you, then you will give something back to me. That community is messier than that. It is about us showing up for each other in whatever way is needed at that moment. That may be dyeing some eggs for Easter, for the Easter egg hunt. And that's not a part of our expertise, but that's what the community needs at that moment. So how do we sort of do the things that allow for us to be ensconced a part of the community, even if they don't fit our narrative of who we are as the health expert, but it achieves what they need? Other things that you talked about.
Talked about, I guess, somewhat in that same vein, but exposure. Like, you don't know what other assets are available in your community and who is being represented or underrepresented in your community if those members are not making themselves available. So just making sure that everyone is not just, you know who they are, but you know the resources that they bring and the skills that they bring for what you just talked about, for the collaboration piece.
Yeah, I love that thought of exposure, because you got me thinking about the need to do that multiple times. That the reason why people say no to you many a times has nothing to do with you. It has a lot to do with prior experiences they have had with people you are reminding them of, that other folks have shown up to the community before and have made promises and made suggestions. And you may need to show up multiple times to address the sins of the past that you did not produce, but it is your responsibility to address if you want to be effective. So you got to expose yourself multiple times. Others.
Wow. Well, do we want to do one more? If we can go 2 minutes over, that would be great. We do have one final exercise to close out.
So one more if we have, and then we'll move to our final exercise.
Great.
So here's what I will say, then we'll move to the final exercise, since it feels like we're at a natural stopping point. Thank you for allowing for me to be here. I have thoroughly enjoyed the morning. I am a much better person. I'm a much better community member in the city of Decatur. I will be better engaged with the students I work with on Emory's campus because of the love and brilliance and what you have shared with me this morning. So I'm deeply appreciative of that.
Well, then before we do that, let's come off Zoom and let's give claps. Thank you so much. That was a really powerful presentation. Thank you. So we just wanted to end this all with a close it out, Tisha. We're going to do a Mentimeter exercise.
Yeah, definitely. We posed a question on the beginning of our session. What was your why? Who or what, was your inspiration? So after today's discussions and all of the wonderful information that's been shared, how has your why been impacted? And has it changed? Have you added anything to your why? And so we'd like you to go to menti.com. As you see on the screen, we've got a special code, and just type in what your why is. If you've got an addition to your why, you've got a new why, or maybe nothing's changed and you've got your old why, but go ahead and do that. Menti.com, use the code on the screen and type in your why.
And you can do multiple ones if you'd like. And we also love a what's next, right? You had the why did you show up here today? Why are you a part of your coalition? Maybe there's a why now, but then maybe there's also a what's next, right? And so in session number 2, we really want to talk about, some practical ways of thinking around, coalition engagement and coalition effectiveness, which would take everything that Ed was talking about cultural humility and having these better and more authentic conversations and engaging with your community authentically. It's going to take all of that, but then how else can we apply it, right? Within our coalitions, within that structure. So that's what session number 2 is going to be about. I'm seeing passionate, nurturer. Ooh, your whys that you want. I love that, nurturing your community. Tisha, I'm sorry, I'm going to be quiet, let you finish.
No, you good. Okay, so we're rolling in. Here we come. Bring people together and effectively impact our community. Yeah, definitely. I think in the chat, I was telling Dr. Lee, I could not write fast enough all of the wonderful information that he was providing. And I'm glad, Katie, that this is recorded, because we'll definitely want to go back and catch anything that we missed. Okay, we've got somebody that says, because services can't happen without understanding. Keep remembering to do something with the information gained. Definitely. Let's see, why is not being selfish? I want to be a better myself and become the best version of myself for your community and in society. Definitely. Let's see. Listen to understand. Listening is so underrated. I mean, and I think Dr. Lee really kind of hit it home with that. You get more from listening than talking sometimes, that you can't gain anything if all you're doing is talking. And if your object is to get information, then you've got to sit and listen and let people talk and do it genuinely, and do it to understand. Listen better and strive. Let's see. These are wonderful. So let me just ask this question. Are these the same whys from the beginning, or have you added to your whys? In the chat. Yes, no. These are wonderful. Oh, my why is still the same, but with structure and more clarity and effectiveness after this session. That is wonderful to hear. Now, Katie put in the chat the website where you can find the links and a lot of information about the series, the Peace series. So please check that out and get that link as well.
I love the remain in service, the idea of being a servant leader or being in service to your community as a framework, I think is so powerful and beautiful. Well, it's 12:35 and we will send you this and the slides. Ed, if you don't mind sending me your slides, I know everyone is going to want those. We will post everything on the project website by Friday. Just give me a little bit of time. Got to upload everything and make it look nice, or as nice as possible. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. We really, really value you and your time, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 26th. So bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.